Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Throwin Bones MMA podcast. I'm your host, Adam Gerber, and unfortunately Kyle Wheeler can't be with me today, but do you know who is? The directors and creators of the documentary series you can find on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and any other platform podcasts are found. It's called The Fighter's Legacy. It's Nate Evans and Rich Donohue, and they've interviewed everyone from Josh Barnett, Big Nog, Little Nog, Frank Mir, Bas Rutten, Ricardo Laborio, Ken Shamrock, Frank Shamrock, Randy Couture, Dan Severn, Wanderlei Silva, Dwayne Ludwig, Don Fry, Pedro Rizzo, Dan Henderson, Chael Sonnen, Tito Ortiz, Mark Coleman, and many, many more. And what they've done is they've taken and they've built these different episodes that pay tribute to the legacy of these legendary fighters and pioneers of the sport. There's episodes on Kevin Randleman, Big Nog, Bas Rutten, Ken Shamrock, Randy Couture, Dan Severn, and then coming on October 16th, Wanderlei Silva. So I'd like to welcome them to the show and thank them very much for giving me the time today. All right, guys, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us on, man.
All right, awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, first off, I think what I'm going to ask you is just what made you want to do this in the first place? What made you want to create the series, and what were both of your roles in the process?
You know, Nate and I have been great friends for decades. I mean, we met each other in college 25 years ago. You know what I mean? And really what bound us is MMA. I mean, like, really, we got into it, you know, we were into it before that, but, you know, kind of fell off, you know what I mean? And in terms of, it was so hard to find it on pay-per-views and TV shows at that point, 25 years ago, different world now, you know? And we bound over Dreamcast, UFC video games, and Blockbuster videos of the fights, and we just caught up, and we've been huge fans ever since. And basically, you know, for me, you know, what, 2 years ago now? No, a year ago, I really saw two of our other close friends, using a different medium. You know, they are artists, photographers, and they were collaborating on a short film. And you know, for me, I saw, you know, Nate and I, our close friends, doing something that's so passionate for them together, working on something together, and we couldn't contribute because we're artists in a different way, but I wanted to do that too. And the first guy I, of course, thought of was, you know, my buddy Nate. I mean, like, you know, and really, Nate, the whole concept's really him. I mean, he's the one who came up with this 30 for 30 style thing. Fantastic.
Well, I mean, like Rich said, I mean, we've been watching these fights and arguing with each other for as long as we've known each other. And I got a little more involved in social media in the world of mixed martial arts. Like, I've had my own social, personal stuff for my family and stuff like that, but just trying to learn a little bit more about what, you know, people are saying. And it just felt a little bit like some legendary fighters weren't really getting their due. Like, they were kind of being written off because, oh, they fought back in the day, people weren't that good back then. And it's just not true. I mean, has the sport become better? For sure. I mean, the training has really stepped up, and people overall are a lot better. That doesn't mean that these people who were great then weren't great then. So they kind of mobilized us to start creating tributes to these guys, because I'm someone, and like, we're both people who like historical stuff. Like, I love behind the music on VH1 back in the day, or I can learn more about my favorite musicians. And Rich and I are both big fans of 30 for 30 and A&E biography and that whole documentary, you know, world. And there really isn't anything like that right now for mixed martial arts. So why not create it? You know, if there's a problem, fix it. So we're looking to fix that problem, to fill that void with quality programming. That's the goal.
Well, I think you more than did that. As far as the original lineup goes, what exactly was your criteria for the first run of fighters that you did?
Like, it really kind of started with Randleman, because Rich and I both met Kevin back at the first UFC we went to, which was, I think, what was it, Rich, 28? It was the night that Couture and Randleman fought, but it was the following one where we met Randleman, the night that Tito and Tanner fought. I think that was 30 or 51. What was that, 30, Rich? But
I forget which one.
Proud. But I mean, he was just like the coolest guy. Like, he was someone who treated everyone with respect, looked them in the eye, shook their hand, and and just acted like an everyman. And I had such admiration for the guy. Hearing him talk to everybody else. I'm sorry, I have someone calling me right now. I apologize.
Oh, that's okay.
But hearing Randleman talk to people, it's like, this guy is really cool. And one of the people that kind of brought us into the sport is seeing like our heroes as these normal guys kind of brought that, deeper connection to it. And then, of course, when he passed, we were, as upset as anybody. So when it came time to do something as a tribute, he was just kind of an easier first choice, I thought, as where we started. And from there, it just kind of snowballed.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, just get back to the whole Randleman thing. When we really came up with the concept, I mean, the anniversary of his death was coming up. I mean, it was about a month away. And, it was just like, seemed like the perfect guy to start it off with because, when a guy like Randleman is a perfect, guy to do something like this on. I mean, you can get plenty of tape on a Royce Gracie, Ken Shamrock, and those guys are fantastic, and they're legends. And, of course, we did Ken Shamrock, and we're open to do Royce Gracie soon. But a guy like Randleman is a guy that was fearsome in the ring, had some amazing highlights, and you see a guy like him, the real story is the humanity he brought outside the cage, and that's really what we tried to do for this whole thing. And how we touched other people, and we saw firsthand in ourselves, and we saw with so many people we talked to. And what was crazy, how it snowballed, like Nate said, is because as soon as we started reaching out to fighters, saying, hey, we're doing something on Kevin Randleman, what do you want to say about it? So many guys had no problem with it. I mean, everyone was so gracious, Randy, Bas, of course, Mark, his wife, and it was just, and that guy, and from there it just kind of continued. We wanted to do other guys. We had a target list of guys we wanted to do. Who we picked, I mean, you're really looking for foundation guys, especially for season 1. But how we got those guys is really from Randleman, kind of like in a small way, kind of helping us. I mean, like, it was crazy. I mean, like, it was really about him, but in a way, that whole positivity of him really brought the whole thing together. Really a catalyst for the whole thing.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, for sure.
Started as a motivator to really get it going.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I mean, but it showed not only can you talk about the pro comp knockout, you could talk about the Randleplex, the Bas Rutten fight. I mean, the highlights. If you know anything about the beginnings of the sport and where they were at that time, I mean, he's a star. I mean, like, he's jumping 6 feet out of the ring. He's a monster. I mean, like, when you look at him, man, it's like, it's so many things outside what he brought to his family, to his team, to Mark, to his wife. I mean, it's just fantastic. I mean, and it's a perfect situation for us, and that's what we want to do for all these guys. And that's what we're trying to do.
And that's very much how I've described it so far to everyone I've told about it, or how we've promoted it on the show so far, even how I talked about it in the intro, is that, you've gone really over the pioneers of the sport. And I think that's really important, because even people who would consider themselves hardcore fans, if they haven't necessarily really gone through the history of the sport, even if they know everything about it now, might not know a whole lot about someone like Kevin Randleman past the nasty staph infection that he had in his chest.
100%.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what we're trying to get out there, is trying to get these stories and these people in front of the masses, because now we're at the point where someone like Kevin Randleman, for example, is kind of starting to fall through the cracks of the MMA history folklore, if you will. And we want them to be recognized. We want them to get more exposure to the newer fans.
I think that's really admirable. I think it's necessary too.
Oh yeah, and some of these legends too. I'm sorry, Nate, just being involved with the community and being fans for so long, you kind of take these legendary guys for granted. That you know who Bas Rutten is, right? You know who Mark Coleman is, right? I mean, you assume. But and at this point, 2019, many people don't. They know some of the highlights, maybe some of their accomplishments. I mean, but you're praising a guy like Khabib, ground and pound, Conor for a big win. I mean, like, who started all that? You know what I mean? Like, that guy. You know what I mean? Coleman started that. I mean, who brought the wrestling in? Severn did. You know what I'm saying? Who mixed the striking? Bas did. All the foundation pieces. You got to understand where it comes from to know where it's going.
Oh, geez. Even just in Bas Rutten, you can draw the lineage all the way down to Dwayne Ludwig, all the way down to T.J. Dillashaw, right? It's still relevant today,
Absolutely. And I mean, some of the stories you uncover with these guys, like the story with going back to Randleman, the story with Randleman and Marcus Sewell was the gentleman's name, a young man who who was about to take his own life and went on Twitter and said he's going to do this, Randleman asked him for his phone number and called him and talked him out of it. And to hear me or Rich or one of us talk about it, that's one thing. And the story is just, jaw-dropping. But to hear Marcus Sewell actually tell the story in his documentary, it really just brings it to life, and it really just hits home. Because, he said how, I went and got a rope, and, I was going to do this, and he had it all planned out. To hear him talk about how Randleman saved his life, it really just gives you chills, to hear that this stuff really happened.
Well, and to get a call from anyone like that, let alone a celebrity that doesn't even know you.
Right, exactly. Someone can reach out on Twitter because they care.
Jeez.
Yeah. It's unbelievable.
And so, here's some of the stories behind it. Behind these fighters, like one of the fights that Rich and I saw was the Randy Couture versus Pedro Hizo fight, the first one, and it was just really brutal. And the second round, in particular, Hizo was doing a lot of damage, and it was really a hard round for Randy. Well, we didn't know, and nobody else knew, but Hizo's cornerman, Marco Rujas, told him he had to finish that fight in the second round because he had a big cut, and the fight could be stopped because of the cut. You need to finish him now. Well, nobody knew that then. When we talked to Big John didn't know that story. We don't think Randy knew that story. So at the same time, we're also kind of uncovering these stories that hadn't been talked about before, which is really interesting.
Yeah, well, I think that's why it's so rich to dive into these things. You never know what was a genuine or even integral part of the story that you didn't before. Relating to the general process, though, what was one of the biggest challenges that you guys faced, organizing the interviews and putting the whole series together?
Yeah. Listen, I'll tell you straight away. I never knew, for so long that, my buddy Nate here is, was a great writer, fantastic teacher. I had no idea how good he was. This guy's like CSI. Adam, this guy's CSI Nate. Okay. I found a couple guys myself, but it's really this guy. I don't know. He has a knack for it. It's still difficult. That's the biggest thing. It's really how to get to a guy, Now with that, once you get to him, they may even say, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Sure. And it's very hard to line it all up. That's a very difficult thing. But find the guys. This guy's got a nose for it. I'm telling you, Adam. He's got a nose for it.
Well, it's really hard. Thanks, Rich. I appreciate that. It's really hard to get these interviews lined up with our own schedules because we're both busy guys. We both have kids. We both are professionals in our own field. But at the same time, these guys are busy people, and these guys don't owe us anything. They're doing us a favor, so we have to be flexible. We've both found that once you get to the guy or the athlete, they're pretty easy to work with and schedule something with. It's getting to the athlete. It's because most of these people have 4 or 5 people in between first phone call and getting to the actual person, and getting to those people. Getting to the lower level people is usually kind of the hardest, I think, because their schedules are busy, our schedules are busy, and they're into what we're doing, but they're not as into it as the person themselves. When you get someone like Wanderlei Silva on the phone, he's into it, and you can just go from there. But getting to these people is kind of tricky. But it's more about lining up the time because we're both busy. We don't sit around all day waiting for the phone to ring. We have our own jobs. We have our own families to do stuff. So finding the time for it is really hard to get the timing lined up.
Oh yeah, and the part of it is now because now the product's out there, season 1's out, and we got more seasons coming, of course. But you're really trying to not only sell a guy on us, but the idea. There was nothing to show them. We're trying to tell them it's kind of like this, but it's going to be like this.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't Mark Coleman even say to you, Nate, that he didn't really even know what we were doing until he heard the Randleman episode, right? Am I right?
That's right. Yeah.
So he didn't really understand. We told him about the concept, but he really had not understanding. He's not listening. Mark doesn't listen to podcasts. You know what I mean? So he's not really doing that. But nevertheless, he was down, extremely gracious. Everybody was, like Nate said. 99.9% of the guys were all fantastic. You know what I'm saying? Finding them was hard, but on the phone they're great. But selling them on the concept was the hard thing too. Now that we have a product that we can show future, guys for the seasons, I think it's going to be a little bit easier, but that was a challenge as well.
Well, you can't just say that 99.9% of the guys were awesome, because that means there's one guy who was an asshole. I got to ask you about that.
No. I wouldn't say an asshole. It was more like it's hard. Some guys say no, bro. I mean, Adam, some guys say no. They're polite about it, but they're going to say no. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
And, in some way, but also it's hard to even get them on the phone, like Nate was saying. I mean, maybe you talk to them, hey, yeah, man, da-da-da. And that's the thing. I mean, that's that 100th percentile. We've had a very good success rate, though, for sure.
That's
well, you have some
encouraging.
people, and I mean, it's not really the fighter themselves, but it's like getting to the fighter. It's like, when you're 3 or 4 people away from the actual fighter, those are the people who kind of take up your time, don't respect your time, don't call you back. That's and most of them are fantastic, but the only people who we really ran into who just don't call you back and you got to call them again and again, they're usually a few people removed from the actual athlete. They're usually, I don't want to say what type of job they have, but they're usually not directly in contact with that person. They're usually they know someone who knows someone. Okay, well help me talk to that person, and they don't call you back.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's fair. That's probably the biggest difficulty. Then I would suppose. Getting.
But even saying some of these guys that have said no to us, I think now, having a product out there that we can show them, I'm expecting better results with some of those situations. I mean, it wasn't a few and far in between, but I expect, hey, like, we're serious. We're not just fanboys trying to talk to you on the phone. We're really doing something here,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, after talking with all these legends, and I would definitely call all of them legends, is there anyone left for either of you who would you consider like a dream interview?
Oh, we got a lot, man. We got a lot coming. For me, I mean, they could say, listen, if you look at the guys we've done and guys that you would expect to be in that group, those are the guys we're trying to get. You know what I mean? 100%. I mean, like, one of them being we want Fedor. I mean, of course. You know what I mean? Like, he's right there with these other guys, 100%. I mean, maybe on top of those guys, depending on who you talk to, right? And and that's a very difficult thing. I mean, you're talking about a language barrier there that's very hard to get over. You know what I mean? But we're going to get it done. We're going to make it happen.
Well, that's extra difficult because I don't even know if he speaks at all. I don't think I've ever seen a clip of him actually talking.
He does not speak any English. No, we were close to talking to him a few weeks ago, but we'll get there at some point. As far as like a dream interview, I don't know if there's anyone in particular that, but I guess for me, it's more like just historical questions and things that have happened. Like, like I'd love to talk to Sakuraba and, and hear, when did you really believe you could beat these Gracie fighters or Hoyts, like at what point did you feel like you weren't going to win this fight against Sakuraba? Like, those are kind of the questions that I really want to know. Or from certain people, like, with Don Fry, at what point did you realize you weren't going to win the fight against Coleman at UFC 10? What was that moment? Like, that's really what I'm most interested in. Instead of, like, talking to someone, it's more like a certain question that I have about a certain fight,
It's more about the moments and who was involved.
Yeah, like just certain moments, like like with Wanderlei Silva. When he knocked out Jackson, the question I really wanted to know was, what was the first thing you thought about when you saw him on the ropes? And I loved his answer. We have that coming out in a couple of weeks, but like I loved his answer. And then the other one I asked him was, you jumped up on the ropes and you flexed and you yelled something in Portuguese. Like, do you remember what you yelled? So those are the things that really kind of interest me most. And like he answered both of those questions, and his answer is great. But those are the things that really perked my interest. Is what were they thinking at this moment, or what made this moment happen the way it did? What is that little piece of the puzzle, that piece of history that we don't know yet?
Really, there's guys, there's pie in the sky guys, and there's plenty of guys. I mean, there's a lot of guys to do a similar situation for. I mean, there's a lot of fighters out there that deserve to be heard, just like we've done with these 8 guys. I mean, like, there's many guys, and we want to bring them to you. That's what we're trying to do.
I mean, like all the obvious ones are there. I mean, of course, Fedor, St. Pierre, Anderson Silva, Hoist Gracie. I mean, all those big ones are certainly there on the list we're trying to get. And they're all on that. They're all that dream interview, level type people. But I mean, those are just kind of whales that you keep plugging away to get to. And then you get the people you can get to, and and they'll all come along at some point,
Well, out of all the people, and I feel like maybe we can give people a little teaser, just make them really want to go listen to this stuff. From each of you guys, like, what was the most shocking or surprising story from the whole process of putting this stuff together that you guys learned?
That's a good question, bud. There's a lot of good stuff. I will say that when is this gonna air out?
I can honestly, whenever you like. I was thinking probably sometime before the end of the week, but I usually just kind of keep my eye out depending on traffic flow stuff. I just try to get stuff the most exposure it can.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, only because I'm about to say is that tomorrow we have Wednesday we have our Mark Coleman episode coming up, and I will just say that of all the guys that we have interviewed, in terms of what's happening, Mark is the best storyteller out of all 8 guys. You know what I mean? Like, you want to hear some stories, this guy's got them in spades. We have so much Mark Coleman interview audio. There's way too much to even put in the episode. You know what I mean? And what he's bringing to the table, I mean, ridiculous stories. Stay tuned for that. I'm sure it's already out by the time you're hearing this, but that's what you want to hear. But for me, something that was shocking to me, I guess, would be, I like to talk about the Nogueira episode where, you had guys like Josh Barnett basically talking about his preparation with Bob Sapp, talking about Nogueira. And basically, if you remember, the unbelievable power bomb where you thought Nogueira was dead. I mean, it's just, he thought he wasn't going to survive that fight. You get different perspectives that I never knew. We never knew, for example, that Barnett was literally training that move for Bob Sapp because of his physique and his background as a pro wrestler. I thought he was just, he had no idea. They were literally training that move to make it happen, and they executed it. And moreover, you got the guys like Laborio and Sperry saying Nogueira was knocked out there, and he woke back up from a punch. So you've got situations like this. You've got insight like this, and that's the kind of stuff that really we're blown away by. Like, I mean, that's one of my favorite fights of all time. Nogueira is one of our favorite fighters ever. And you think you know everything about a guy, and you don't. I mean, that's I was shocked by that.
I'll say like two things that really shocked me. One of them was, since you're talking about Nogueira, one of them was a story that Walt Blois told. Walt Blois is a black belt, jiu-jitsu black belt under Nogueira. But he tells a story how Nogueira, he had a terrible accident when he was a child. We got run over by a truck. Many people know that, but what they don't know is that he was in a coma for an extended period of time. And Nogueira actually heard the doctor tell his mother that he was going to die and was preparing her for this. And Nogueira had the will to fight back. I'm not going to die. I'm going to come back. And he came back and became one of the greatest martial artists of all time. When he was a child, what was he, Rich, 9 or 10 years old? When he was a child.
Younger than that when he had better.
Younger than that?
Yeah, younger than that.
But
yes.
But they thought he was going to die, and and he didn't. Obviously, he came back and did what he did. Another one that was really shocking was a story that Ken Shamrock told, how he ran away from a foster family when he was a kid, and robbed 5 or 6 stores, was stabbed behind a 7-Eleven, and woke up handcuffed to a hospital bed. And to hear that,
he ran away from home. Yeah,
10 years old, I think he was. I think he was 9 or 10 years old when he did that.
And yeah, he was living out of a car. He was living out of a car for months, and then he got and they ended up getting strong arm robbery. I mean, you hear a guy like Ken Shamrock. I mean, he's on the TV a couple months ago for that bare knuckle thing he's doing now, and he's doing fantastic. He's back on wrestling. I mean, he's an icon. I mean, anybody I talk to, at my job, I have in my regular job. These guys don't watch MMA, but I tell them about Ken Shamrock, who that is. And the fact that he's so big and that he came from that, it's just that is just the kind of heart and will you have to have. And he really expresses it. And it's right, that was totally shocking.
Wow. Yeah,
and he's also a really cool guy. I I mean, like they're all really cool, you know. But you know, he was really cool as well, though, for sure.
Extra. Yeah, I mean, between the powerbomb and, you know, getting stabbed at that age and, you know, the dreams in the coma, the visions in the coma, it's what's really amazing for me and why I love the sport so much is I think one of the big, like, sub-niches, and you guys can tell me if you agree with this or not, is that, you know, MMA is a sport for, like, English nerds who never grew out of sports, you know? Because a lot of these backstories, you hear about them in the events, and it's like they border on the realm of Greek mythology almost at points.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And, I mean, like...
The hero's journey. The hero's journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, like, a part of it is, like, you know, is what makes these people do what they do? Like, what made them want to fight, you know? Like, like Randleman was bullied when he was a kid. Bas had eczema and asthma, and he was in terrible health when he was a kid, and he was getting bullied. Ken came from this life we just talked about. Nogueira had the accident. Wanderlei Silva was obese and was being bullied as a child, and that developed those feelings of rage in him that he used years later as a fighter. So what made them want to do what they do? And we find that very interesting as well. Like, you know, what made them do this? And why do they go in there and fight people for a living? Why is their goal in life to be the best fighter of all things? And, like, we find that interesting, you know, whatever their journey is to get there.
That's fantastic. I think that it's definitely that. It's part, you know, part storytelling, part like case study in psychology. It's part of what makes the sport so fascinating.
Yeah, and the strategy too. I mean, the melding of the styles. I mean, it's the best sport in the world. I mean, like, you know, mixed martial arts. You know, it's like Bruce Lee had said. It's physical expression. You know, and these guys are expressing themselves different ways. It's not constrained to a rule set and uniforms. I mean, clearly there's a rule set in MMA, but you know, there's no first down, there's no touchdowns. You don't have to do this. There's no, you know, but you know, it's you have to submit or knock the other man out, and there's many different ways to do that. You know, I compare it to, you know, when even on Saturday night. I mean, you got the beautiful fights UFC, but at the same time you have Triple G fighting in boxing, and I love Triple G. I like, you know, I'm not the biggest boxing guy, but Triple G is my guy, and you know, you're watching and just. It's funny to me when you go back and forth. All respect you to boxing, but you watch a boxing match and it's 8 rounds of the same thing, and then I'm watching and I flip back and I'm watching, you know, Malarkey and Riddell. You know, no one even knows who these guys are. Basically, I mean, leaving it all on the cage. I mean, like, you know, and one guy's bringing one style, the other guy's trying to accomplish his style. I mean, like, you know, it's like whereas G and his opponent, there's some differences, but ultimately they have the same set. You know what I mean? Whereas you got 2 different things. I mean, like, that's the expression is the best thing, 100%.
Well, not only that, but the expression in the cage is a direct reflection of not only the psychology that we were just talking about, but also their backstory and how they got there.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Couldn't agree more.
So out of this whole series, when you guys were doing this interview, what was your biggest experience of feeling like starstruck? Or did you have it?
Boy, he's got one. I mean, listen, I mean, like, I personally, I mean, all the guys, I have no problem talking with folks personally, but I mean, you got guys that, you know, you grew up watching, you know what I mean, that idolize, of course. I mean, waiting to get on the phone with Ken Shamrock for me personally, you know, I'm not going to lie, but, you know, it's a little nerve-wracking. I mean, here's a guy that, you know, one of the biggest stars in the world. I mean, and here I am, you know, New York. I mean, what am I doing? You know, and in fact, you talk to a guy like this, they're all 100% gracious, right? But for me, going into it, yeah, I mean, like, there's a little bit of I never would have thought watching Don Fry, Ken Shamrock 20 years ago that I'd be talking to this man on the phone right now. I never thought I would be doing that, but here I am, you know, and we're blessed. You know, what can I say?
Yeah, and there's no greater feeling I have with this show than when it comes time when you're about to talk to someone, you know, someone famous, and you know you haven't talked to him yet, and it's kind of that feeling, you know, for the first time, you know. And the first really famous person I spoke with was Mario Sperry, and he was such a nice guy. And maybe some people don't know who he is. I mean, I certainly knew who he was. He was Nogueira's trainer and co-founded Brazilian top team. a very big deal. And hearing him talk, he was such a nice guy, and he was so well-spoken and gave such good information that it kind of gave us wings to really believe that, this could really happen. We can really talk to people. We can really get them to share their stories, because Mario had great stories. Like Mario said, I told Nogueira, don't try to take Bob Sapp down. And what does he do? He tries to take him down. He gets slammed on his head, So he was really thoughtful and informative. And the first really famous fighter I spoke with was Couture. And that was a big deal. Couture was always one of my all-time favorites. And he was, I don't know, Rich was the second or third person we spoke with. And and he was great. I mean, absolutely fantastic, very polite, very professional. I was a bit starstruck that time. And, I get starstruck every time I talk to these guys. I talk to Bas, talk to Randleman, talk to Coleman. Every time I talk to these guys, I'm starstruck. I mean, no joke. I don't feel like it's easy for me to sit here and say, oh, I don't, they're people, I'm people. Okay, yeah, that's true. But I still definitely get starstruck by these guys.
Well, it's impossible not to, right?
Yeah. I mean, like, how do you not get starstruck by these guys when you see what they've done? I mean, when you know who they are, you follow their careers, you've seen them do more human than human things. And yeah, they're human, but no other humans are doing what these guys are doing.
Yeah, it's a little bit extra. That's, I think, where most of the infatuation comes from, is that they do these things, yet we can find connections with ourselves through their stories.
Yeah, well put.
Well, in the end, I know sometimes, especially me from putting together projects, different articles and stuff, sometimes you get working on something, get working on a series, and the episode or the piece that you end up thinking in the beginning is going to be your favorite to work on, or the most fun to put together, or the best quality in the end doesn't end up being that way. So which episode for you guys ended up being the most fun or the most enjoyable to put together? Or which one are you most proud of?
I mean, it's like naming your favorite kid, though, Adam. You know what I mean? It's like naming your favorite kid.
But everyone's got a favorite kid. I mean, come on.
Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, listen. It's knowing that it's 8 of my children, and any one of them are fantastic. I mean, like, we had a great time in different ways for each one. I mean, there was challenges and there was accomplishments for all 8 episodes, and it was fantastic. Probably, the most fun I had, was working on Mark's episode. Because, like I said, Mark, it was almost an embarrassment of riches, because other guys, you talk to a guy for half an hour, 40 minutes, and then you turn that into something. Whereas with Mark, it was hours of content, but he was so engaging the entire time, and it was kind of like, how do I distill this? But it was fun. It was a fun puzzle, and a lot of laughter, but he's really brilliant. He's a genuine guy, great storyteller, and like I said, and that was, it's one thing to have your expression of writing for the script on there, but to have a guy like that help accentuate what's going on is just a nice stew there. It's fantastic. I had the most fun doing that one myself.
Hey, man, something about Mark is having so much interview time. A lot of that was for Kevin Randleman as well, because we talked about Kevin, and because really a lot of his story is part of Kevin's story. So as he was telling Kevin's story, his experiences with Kevin, he's talking about his own experiences as well. So there's a lot in his documentary that came from the interviews on Kevin. But really, Mark is one of the best storytellers I've ever heard. I mean, take fighters or athletes away from it. He's as good as it gets when it comes to storytelling, and he's a really funny, really, really personable guy. As far as like the one that was like the most fun to work on, it's so hard to say. I really enjoyed talking to Bas. Bas has really good stories, and the people we talked to with Bas, like Kenny Rice. Kenny Rice is one of the nicest guys I've ever spoken with, period. And Quadros is great. Quadros is fantastic. And Amir Peretz, he was someone that I've been familiar with, but I didn't really know him that well, and I don't really know that much about Krav Maga, but to hear him talk about, what he and Bas do together, they're all really nice guys. And but you know, I feel like I'm selling a lot of these short because, I mean, they're all fantastic. I mean, all these, you know, the guys for Couture, Leben, Corey, Ed Herman, those guys were awesome too, you know. So talking to these guys, you know, they're all their own journey. I guess I think as far as the episodes go, the one I'm most proud of, I think it kind of depends on what you're looking for. Because if you want like a complete tribute, like I think that's really Kevin's really captures that pure post, you know, that pure tribute to someone's life. Mm-hmm. But if you want to hear the fighters talk, you know, like Bob talks a lot, Coleman talks a lot, Randy talks quite a bit. You know, all these guys just did great interviews and provided great insight. And I mean, Wanderlei has a lot of great moments too. But they all bring something different to the table. And it's also kind of like who are you into most? Like, who do you want to learn most about? And then once you learn about that person, maybe you'll learn about somebody else, you know, and maybe they'll bring you to someone else's life that you may not would otherwise find out about.
Yeah, I think that's really poignant. I guess I should have prefaced the question with saying that all the episodes are fantastic. Of course, it's not like one is that like one's great and one's not watchable. I just different highlights. I think for people are a good idea. And I guess the essence I was sort of getting at, I think you definitely covered it, was, you know, sometimes as you work on something, you realize that you're sort of putting something together and telling a story that's not really out there yet, and you're making something truly unique, and it sort of becomes more dear to your heart because you're not like I would have assumed that the Bas Rutten one maybe wasn't as satisfying to make as the others, just because so much of Bas's story is out there already and people know about it, and it was more of just connecting a lot of the dots and putting some of your own original content in from the interview, whereas someone like Nogueira or Dan Severn, people might not know a lot more about, or it was in an era that it was harder to disperse information, so it might have been more of you helping to create the story and put it out in the first place.
Yeah, no, I could definitely see that. I guess in that sense, I think it would for me personally, I think it would be the one we done Kevin Randleman, because some of these stories I didn't know were out there. Like, I didn't know about this story with the young man who was going to take his own life. I didn't know that story before I started this. I just knew that he was a really good guy because I met him and he was really cool to us. But then you hear...
It needs to be noted too that, I'm sorry, it needs to be said too that his wife was extremely gracious, Elizabeth, as well. You know, that was really
wonderful.
That episode fantastic. Elizabeth was very gracious and was fantastic. How do I say that? It really brings more to the episode. Without having Kevin, of course, but having Elizabeth there was great.
She's a wonderful person, and her sister Erica. I'm sorry, Kevin's sister Erica was wonderful as well. But hearing these people come forward and talk about Kevin, you know, hearing Rico Rodriguez, Randy Couture, Bas Rutten, you know, Coleman, obviously, all these guys just come forward, you know, very, very willingly, you know, and like we said earlier, that's kind of what got the whole show rolling was, hey, Randy, we're doing this one on Kevin. Can we do one on you as well? Okay, great. You know, then, you know, and there we had it set up with Randy, with Bas, with Coleman, but it all kind of came from Kevin, really, to begin with. And, you know, I mean, we owe a lot to him for inspiring us in a way, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. I'm honestly a little bit choked up, to be honest, because the Kevin Randleman episode was very moving, and I just got myself thinking back to it right now. So sorry about that.
Wow.
I guess you've already mentioned there's a season 2 coming out.
Oh yeah,
or planned.
Yep, we're gearing it up, making it happen.
Excellent.
Do we want to announce the people that are going to be in season 2, Nate, yet, or we want to save that? We can share. We have some people who are finalized for season 2. Some people we're still working on. But just the people who are finalized: Dan Henderson, Henzo Gracie, Don Fry, Tito Ortiz, and some other people who are very close. We don't have a full commitment from them yet, so I don't want to say their names and have it not. Yeah, we don't want to say, guys. We don't want to jinx anything. But But that's a nice starting lineup there. It's a nice for the first 4.
Well, that's a fantastic
100%.
starting lineup, and I wasn't expecting any breaking news, so thank you very much for sharing that. You guys going to go into like a season 3 and 4, or do you see yourself moving on to other projects in the future?
No, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we want to keep this going. I mean, in terms of seasons, I mean, like, you never know how it's going to go, right? But, there's no reason to do season 3. Why not do season 3 or maybe even a season 4? I mean, it's hard to say that far ahead, but I mean, if you're bringing something as quality as, you're trying to bring something quality that's timeless, that's a tribute. So something that anybody can look back on, and that's what we're trying to do. And I think we've got that done with season 1. We want to do it with season 2, and why not keep the momentum going more? I mean, other things could be happening, but why not? Why not?
Well, I mean, like, these are things that see. What's kind of funny is, yes, I'm proud of this work. I like doing this work. We're both proud of this work. We both like doing it. But if Rich and I weren't making these documentaries, we'd be talking to each other right now, arguing about this stuff. Like arguing about, how good is Real Chonin? Like he beat Anderson Silva, but then Dan Henderson knocks him out in a minute. So really, how good is the guy? So he and I, like, we do this stuff anyway. I mean, like, talking about these fights, talking about these old fights, talking about Whitaker and Adesanya. I mean, we do this anyway, so we're just kind of doing what we normally do, but we're just kind of recording it right now, and we're doing these interviews too, obviously. But we do this, regardless.
Well, I think it's wholesome and refreshing to hear that you guys have been able to keep connected all this time through your love of mixed martial arts, and that's what me and Kyle have essentially begun to do with this show. So hopefully we can go that long as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. Hopefully we can talk again here pretty soon. We'd love to talk again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
We'll have you on the show anytime. Absolutely. And
yeah,
I guess
man,
whenever, dude.
Awesome.
Yeah, man, we'll come out and talk about the fights whenever you want. You want to talk about the fights sometime, talk about, whatever, Whitaker and Adesanya or whoever else. We can talk about whatever you want.
Well, since we've mentioned it, why don't we move over right now? We'll take a quick break and recollect and see what we're going to talk about, and then we'll be like right back to break down UFC 243. How's that sound?
That sounds great.
All right, and that's going to be in a separate podcast episode, so we can help promote this interview first. So everyone who's listening to this interview, you'll probably have already heard it, and thanks for listening to both, I guess.